In the spotlight tonight, an epic story of the shaping of America that we all need to know. A toddler named Huey Newton was spirited from Monroe to Oakland with his sharecropper parents in 1943. His father had barely escaped a lynching in Louisiana for talking back to his white overseers. Huey Newton would become perhaps the most militant of the disillusioned offspring of the Great Migration. He founded the Black Panther Party in 1966 and reveled in discomfiting the white establishment with his black beret, rifle, and black power rhetoric. Another boy from Monroe who migrated with his parents to Oakland took an entirely different path. He would go on to become one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Bill Russell was born in Monroe in 1934 and watched his parents suffer indignity one after another. A policeman once grabbed Russell's mother on the street and ordered her to go and take off the suit she was wearing. He said that she had no business dressing like a white woman and that he'd arrest her if he ever saw her like that again. Bill Russell watched his mother sit at the kitchen table in tears over the straits they were in. Soon afterward, his parents packed up the family and moved to Oakland, where a colony of people from Monroe had fled. Russell was 9 years old. He would get to go to better schools, win a scholarship to the University of San Francisco, and lead his team, the Dons, to 2 NCAA championships. He would join the Celtics in 1956 and lead Boston to 11 championships in his 13 seasons. He would become perhaps the greatest defensive player in NBA history and the first black coach in the NBA. There is no way to know what might have happened to Bill Russell had his parents not migrated. He would not have been allowed into any white college in Louisiana in the early 1950s, and thus would not have been in a position to be recruited to the NBA. The consequences of his absence from the game would now be unimaginable to followers of the sport. That passage is from Isabel Wilkerson's extraordinary new book, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. The book is important beyond measure, monumental in its scope and historical authority, yet intensely intimate. You cannot hold it in your hands and read it without tears and without awe at the achievements of the people who live in its pages. Your understanding of America is woefully incomplete until you read The Warmth of Other Suns. Bill Russell is just one of many touched by Isabel Wilkerson's words. He'll share his story in a moment, but first, the author. Isabel, this story is epic, as your subtitle claims. How could it come to be that in the 21st century there was an American epic history that had not been told?
It's unimaginable to think what might have happened if we had not had the opportunity to really understand the effect of 6 million African Americans leaving the Jim Crow South, a caste system which had held them fast in a particular place, and defecting. It was in some ways a defection from this caste system. And they went from all parts of the South to all parts of the North and West from 1915 to 1970, and essentially changed the shape of this entire country.
The title, The Warmth of Other Suns, tell us where that came from.
It comes from a passage written by Richard Wright, who was one of the great novelists of the 20th century and one of the best-known people who made this migration himself. He, in some ways, devoted his entire career to this, to writing about this, and it comes from a passage in which he described, in some ways, why anyone would leave the only place that they'd ever known for a place that they'd never seen. The warmth of other suns means that they were so desperate to leave that they were willing to go to places that were actually colder, but they were seeking the shelter of warmer suns.
And you chose to tell the story, I think, brilliantly through 3 main characters who take us through this multi-decade history. How did you, from the 6 million, find the 3?
Well, I went to all kinds of places in the North and the West in order to interview 1,200 people was essentially a casting call looking for people who had migrated, as had Bill Russell's parents. And what I ended up doing was narrowing it down to 3 people who would represent the 3 major streams of this migration. This was not a haphazard unfurling of lost souls. People thought well in advance about what they were going to do. They had to make a hard decision. Every African American in the South during the period we're talking about, during this caste system, had to decide whether to leave or whether to stay. And it was a heart-wrenching decision no matter what they decided to do. And so there were 3 distinct paths of this migration. One was up the East Coast, one was up the Middle West, the mid part of the country from Mississippi and Alabama to Chicago and Detroit, and Cleveland, and then the one that was out to the West, which is what Bill Russell's parents took.
You followed Dr. Foster to the West, who, unlike Bill Russell, who went to Oakland, he went Hollywood. He went straight Hollywood, didn't he?
He did. He was a surgeon who served in the Army as a captain during the Korean War. And when he got out of the Army, it turned out he could not practice surgery in his own hometown of Monroe, Louisiana, the same hometown as Bill Russell's family. And he decided to take this perilous journey, unexpectedly perilous journey, from Monroe to California. It was a journey that I tried to recreate as he tried to do that.
Now, you write, they did what humans have done for centuries when life became untenable, what the Pilgrims did under the tyranny of British rule, what the Irish did when there was nothing to eat, what the European Jews did during the spread of Nazism. They did what human beings looking for freedom throughout history have often done. They left. The situation they left, in your research, your 15 years of research and writing, did you find that the conditions they were living in were worse than what you had imagined before researching?
They were worse than what I had imagined. We all know about the water fountains and restrooms. I actually set out to find every other possible way that the caste system was enforced. And the goal was to not talk about the restrooms and things that we know, but the things that we don't. For example, it was a caste system in which it was actually against the law for a black person and a white person to play checkers together in Alabama and Birmingham. In many courtrooms throughout the South, there were actually white Bibles and a black Bible to swear to tell the truth on.
Because? Because
there was this desire to keep the races so separate that they could not touch the same Bible.
They wouldn't touch the same Bible. You have a lot of examples of great African Americans who would not have had the opportunity to excel, or may not have had if they had stayed